Hello and welcome to A Sense of Centerville and Washington Township, your place for stories about extraordinary and ordinary residents and places in the Centerville and Washington Township area. I'm Susan from Centerville-Washington History, and I look forward to hearing your story. Today, my guest is Megan Sparks. Megan Sparks has been a school board member for Centerville City Schools since January 2018. She has a master's degree in education and a bachelor's degree in human ecology from The Ohio State University. As a second-generation Elk and a mother of 5 children, Megan has learned how to work hard and stand up for her values and beliefs. On the board, she serves as Legislative Liaison. She is an advocate for families with special needs and serves in numerous volunteer roles. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, I'm very excited. And before we begin our conversation, I wanted to kind of point out our book here. Megan serves on the board, and although this doesn't talk about her specifically and board members, it does give a history of our schools, which can be useful to people who are trying to learn more about Centerville and Washington Township. But we're talking about Megan Sparks today. So can you share some of your experiences growing up in Centerville and many memories that stand out?
I would say my childhood was a cross between the Goonies and Sandlot. There was a group of kids in the neighborhood, and we all stuck together, various ages, and we'd ride our bikes all over Centerville. Well, around Klein, Bristol. We weren't allowed to go past 48. It was 2 lanes then.
Yeah.
And it was like a group of us. And it was a lot of fun. My dad would come home from work almost every night in the summer, in the spring, and the fall, and he would play baseball with all the neighborhood kids. He was the dad outside who was the all-time pitcher, and we would hit against him and have a little baseball game every day after work. And we played WBL, Washington Township Baseball League back then. And my brother and I played in that league for years and years. And a fun story. Terry Blair, I'm sure you've heard of him before. He was our state representative, great man of Centerville. He was the commissioner for girls softball. And for some reason, I don't know why, every year when I would get my uniform, we'd meet at Centerville High School in the South Unit, and there'd be tables, and you'd go table to table. I would be pelted with girls' socks. And every year I'd look up, and there would be Terry Blair just laughing. He thought it was hilarious. I don't know, it was always me, but I was always his target.
Probably because you could take it.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And he knew my dad, and he knew our coaches. And yeah, he would throw girls the socks because they had the little stripe built into the socks. So we got socks every year to match our uniform.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, and is this your senior shirt here? It's not your softball shirt.
no, that's my senior shirt, Centerville High School, Centerville Elks, and the back is your high school nickname.
Okay.
And my nickname was Horseshack.
Okay. From Welcome Back, Cotter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I called my advisor, Brian Stevens, I'd call him Cotter, and he called me Horseshack. And it's funny because a lot of kids at Centerville High School thought that was my real name.
Because that was, that show was not popular at that point. So
No.
Okay.
I don't know how I got into that show. I've always liked old stuff, Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant, the Marx Brothers, and I loved Welcome Back, Cotter. So he would call me Horseshack, and I would call him Cotter.
Okay.
So he was my advisor. He was a great man. He was the head boys soccer coach. And every Friday we'd get bagels from the Bagel Cafe, and we would write the date on the back of one bagel, and we would hang it from the ceiling. And at the end of the year, they would be rock hard, and we would pack them up and put them in his cabinet. And the first day of school the following year, we'd put it up. And so by the end of the 4 years, he had all these bagels all over his advisory ceiling. I don't know why we did that, but he let us do it. He was a lot of fun. And so he was a great man. I miss him. So
Yeah, and those teachers that make important and traditions are very important for teenagers and feeling included and that their voice matters. So.
Yeah, he definitely did that. We had a unique advisory because his niece was in my grade, and so he handpicked some kids. So most advisories were like A through B and B through C, but we had a nice little mixture, and we all got along, even though we were a hodgepodge of kids. And
so with this, when you went to school, Centerville High School looks similar to what it has now. It just has the chemistry rooms that have been added to the front. No,
we didn't have the chemistry rooms. We didn't have the athletic entrance. We didn't have the performing arts center. All of that was added. Okay. I was the building coordinator for Destination Imagination years ago, and Mr. Wesney was the coordinating principal at the high school. And he said something about, oh, well, that's in Central Theater. And I'm like, what's Central Theater? And he's like, when was the last time you were here? I'm like, when I graduated. He's like, come on, I'm going to give you a tour. And I could, it's a completely different school. I would get lost in it now.
Yeah.
These kids are very, very fortunate to go to that, a school like that.
Talk a little bit more about your dad and his impact in your growing up experience in Centerville.
Well, he was an elk, so he got it. Actually, he moved here, I think it was in 1957 when he was in high school, and he hated it here because it had one light at Main Street in Franklin. And he grew up in Belmont, and he would ride his bike home the first couple months they lived here and sleep in the backyard. And the new owners of my grandparents' house would call and say, could you please come get your son? But as, a lot of kids, it takes change. And then he played on the football team. He was on the weight club. He was baseball team. So he was very active. So we were active growing up. So very environmentalist. Big into recycling. I think he got that from my grandfather. Behind our house was a giant cornfield at one point and a giant barn. And it's now, I believe it's called Hunter's Glen. It's between Bristol and Revere Village. Mm-hmm. I believe it's Hunter's Glen. And when they were tearing down the barn and draining the pond, the natural pond was back there. They didn't take out the fish. And my dad came home from work and saw what they were doing and had big, giant 5-gallon buckets and took all of us kids back there, and we filled up the buckets with the water, and then we'd put the fish in. And when I remember him driving us over to Oak Grove Park, Oak Grove, and putting the fish in that pond to save them. Mm-hmm. So I think I give my love for my outdoors and environment from my dad.
He sounds like a great person.
He is.
All right. So some of the things you did in high school, from what I understand, you did sports. So talk a little bit about the schools you went to and the things you did while you were in school.
First, I went to Klein. Back then, it was a K-5 building. So there was no villages, primary villages, which was really nice because you got to know the kids, the older kids in your neighborhood. And like I said before, we all hung out together anyway. Great teachers at Klein. I loved being a cougar. Mr. Hall comes to mind. He was the gym teacher. And if you had a good day, he took a little felt tip marker and he'd put a little star on your hand. And as a kid, that was like the best thing ever. And it was so easy. I mean, it didn't cost him anything except for a felt pen, but it was teaching like that. That was really good. Mr. Roach made one of the biggest impacts of my life. I had hearing trouble growing up and had to have tubes in my ears. And so when I was learning how to read, I was hearing the sounds incorrectly. And so in second grade, I was held back. And I always thought, I'm stupid. And then teachers would tell my parents how smart I was, but they wouldn't tell me until I got to fifth grade. And Mr. Roach pulled me aside, and I'll never forget this. It was the Ohio test, not the state test. It was our class test on Ohio. And I got a perfect score on that test. And he's like, look, Megan, you're just as smart as all these other kids. You could be in the EDGE program. He's like, you have to believe in yourself. And his words didn't ring true to me until I think I got to middle school. And I started getting like really good grades because by that time I'd had so much speech therapy and tubes in my ears. And I was able to catch up with Centerville, which is another testament of what a great school district Centerville is. So I loved Mr. Roach. So they had just great teachers at Klein.
Yeah. And then you went on to MagSig.
I did. Love MagSig. Yeah. It's 100 years old this year. Big fan of MagSig. And Mr. Forth was a teacher there, Bob Forth. He also made a huge impact in my life. He introduced me to Carl Sagan. So in 7th and 8th grade, we'll do a science unit and we watch Cosmos. And I just fell in love with astronomy. And I would get back then it was the VHS tapes. And I would get the VHS tapes from the library and watch them on the weekend. I was kind of dorky.
That's okay.
And so when I got on to, high school, I knew I wanted to go be an astronaut. That was my goal. And then when I got to Ohio State, I thought that was my goal too, but God had different plans. But I think we're going to talk about that later,
Yeah,
about how my life changed.
for sure. Let's do that. Actually, talk about, so you worked at this summer school. Can you talk about that?
So in middle school, Mrs. Hill was the librarian, and one day she said, "Would you like to come help me teach the summer school class?" And it was, I think, kindergarten, third grade. And I was like, sure. And the first summer I did it, I got paid. And the second summer I did it, I got paid. And it was my first taste of teaching. And it was a lot of fun. And I think that made it, that was also my first job, was being her little science helper and helping with the little kids. And I think that was a little hint.
That maybe you should go into education.
Yes.
I say on here about Bob Gregg. Would you talk about him as well? I hadn't heard his name, and so I Googled it. So Cheryl, well, you don't know everything if you don't grow up here.
They broke the mold when they made Coach Gregg. He was never Mr. Gregg. It was always Coach Gregg, and he was the head football coach
for 40 years of two different places. But he was definitely an impact.
Oh yeah, and he was hard as nails. But in a good way. And in fact, my dad went down one day with my brother and my two male cousins to watch the Bengals practice. Mm-hmm. And he was standing along a fence talking to this guy. And he's like, "I'm kind of disappointed." He's like, "I thought it would be more intense, this practice." And the guy looks at him and goes, "If you want an intense practice, you go up to Centerville." He goes, "And you watch Bob Gregg." And my dad goes, "I'm actually from Centerville." So he had a reputation, but all the kids who had him loved him. And it's funny because part of his curriculum was tumbling. And I can't tumble.
Because he taught
gym
as well. Okay, yes, that's the connection.
Yeah,
okay.
And if you were a football player, you took him. So I was in this class with all these football players, and they were doing like backflips and everything else, and I couldn't do it. And he was rough. We loved him. He's a wonderful person, or he was, and he yelled, "Murray, go sit down. GD, if you get hurt, you know the paperwork I'd have to do."
It's all about the paperwork.
Yeah. So I sat down and watched the football players tumble.
He's like, "You're going to get hurt." Yeah, I don't want that on my
And the irony is all 5 of my kids are gymnasts. They did not get that from me.
Yeah. Well, maybe because you were so bad at it that you were like, "Okay, we got to work on this early."
Yeah. But yeah, Coach Gregg, he was great. He did the sweat test. I've never heard of a teacher doing a sweat test. After his class, you'd have to line up, and he would feel your forehead. And if you weren't sweating enough, you failed for the day.
Really?
Yes.
Every person?
Every person. So you'd see guys at the water fountain like throwing
splashing water in the face.
Yeah.
Well, that counts for different fitness levels, but I guess everyone's got to work hard.
Yeah. He was a great guy. I love Coach Gregg.
That's awesome. I'm really glad you pointed that out. All right, I want to move on to choosing your major at school. So you talked a little bit about astronomy, and then what shifted with you and what happened there?
So I was studying aeronautical engineering, or at least I thought I was going to study aeronautical engineering, and I was having a really hard time passing math and chemistry, and I was going to all the help sessions. I was going to all my classes. It wasn't like I was skipping classes. It got to the point where like my math teachers knew my name on a first name basis out of kids of like hundreds. And I was sitting in a chemistry help session, and it finally dawned on me. It was like an epiphany. I am never going to understand this. And so I got up, and the TA goes, "Hey, Megan, everything all right? Do you get it now? Are we okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, everything's great." And I walked straight back to my dorm, and I dropped the class because I was like, there's no way. At the time, though, I was working at the Homeless Family Foundation. I was volunteering, not working. And on my first night there, so what it was, was kids who were homeless would go to this facility every day after school, and they'd get a snack, they'd get tutoring, and then they'd go off and play. And so I was volunteering there. And
Is this in Columbus?
It's in Columbus, okay. Yes. Sorry, it's in Columbus. And my first night there was a little boy named Shay. And I wish I could find where Shay is because Shay had such an impact on my life. And the teacher said, you can go work with that little boy. So I go and I work with him and we get all his work done and he takes off his coat and, we're having a good time. And afterwards I play with him in the rec room and then the kids leave. And the teacher approaches me and says, he's never responded to a volunteer like that. She goes, most people he will not take off his coat and he will not speak to. She's like, you have a gift. And so when I dropped chemistry, I was like, I'm going to try education. And so I went into education. And then I came home and because I worked at McDonald's, and Ray Wright, Debbie Wright, very wonderful people. They would let me come home spring break, winter break, summer break. I wouldn't have to apply. I'd just be like, I'm home. And they'd be like, okay, be here at 9 a.m. on Monday. No problem. So I came home and there was a young special needs boy working there. And I thought, I'd like to volunteer with Special Olympics. Don't know why. I just did. And I went and I volunteered for their big track event, went back to school, graduated, came back. And I thought, I need to do something with my life. I'm just working. So, and I was always someone who kept very busy. So I called Special Olympics and they're like, we'd love you as a volunteer. So I went and I did basketball, soccer, track, all these sports, met my husband and had Zach. And Zach is our oldest child and he's autistic. And it's funny the way you look back and see God working in your life. Like this was not the path. I had no idea about this path. This was not the path I was envisioning. But it started way back with Shay. It started with the young boy at McDonald's and God preparing me. And I hear a lot of special needs families say, I felt so alone. I was all by myself when we got our diagnosis. And I was so blessed. I never had that. I had Linda Connell, Art Komorowski, Jane Weichel. They have been my mentors through all this. Great people. But I was very blessed. I never had that feeling of being alone because I had them.
And how did you know those people?
Through Special Olympics.
Through Special Olympics, okay.
Yeah. So I don't know why I came home and volunteered, but God had a plan and I did.
Yeah. So how old was your son when he got diagnosed?
19 months.
Okay, so pretty young.
Yeah. He was nonverbal until about the age of 11. So he's in a self-contained classroom. Now that he's at the high school, he's taking more typical classes with a paraprofessional. But even now, I have people guiding me, like, you need to try this. You need to get him into this, which the special needs, it really is a community. But it's funny because when we were pregnant with him, I kept thinking, oh, great, I'll have a little assistant coach. This will be great. He can help me. I never thought he was going to be an athlete. But my second child, Nick, he's starting to coach. So this past fall, because he's 12, Top Soccer let him be a volunteer. And he worked with the 5- and 6-year-olds, and he took it so seriously. I'd be like, okay, we're going to be late for soccer. I can't be late for soccer, Mom. Coach Greg is depending on me.
So responsible.
Yeah,
and that's a fun thing to learn. So let's talk a little bit about the decision to run for the school board and moments that stand out there.
We got an email. It wasn't Parent Square then, but whatever Centerville was using at the time, that I think it was Brad Evers was stepping down, and they were looking for applicants. And it was something my husband and I kind of talked about me doing when the kids got older, not this young.
Yeah, they're not young.
Yeah, they're little kids still.
Yeah.
And so I said, oh, they're looking for a school board member. And my husband's like, great, you're going to apply. And I'm like, okay. I didn't think I was going to get it, and I didn't. It went to John Dahl, which was the logical choice. He had lots of experience on the school board. It was end of the fiscal year, no hard feelings. But when I got my rejection letter, my husband goes, oh, it looks like you're running in November. And I go, I am? He's like, oh, yeah, you are.
He knows you have that
yes.
in you.
And so my first year, it was just me, and my daughter was 2 or 3 at the time. Wow. And I'd have her in the stroller and we'd go through neighborhoods and I'd push her and put the little flyer next to, not in the mailbox, that's illegal, and the little flag next to the mailbox. And so, and it was really sweet because Cotter called me and he goes, hey, Horshak, I heard you're running for the school board. And I said, yeah, I am. He goes, tell me where to send my check. And that meant so much for me that he reached out to kind of make me teary.
So he supported you.
Yeah, he was a great man. And since he was the soccer coach, my parents lived on Bristol, one of the greatest streets in Centerville. And he would leave the soccer stadium and go down Bristol to get to 48. And if he would see my mom or dad outside, he'd pull over and be like, hey, how's Horshak doing? So he kept tabs on me.
Yeah, people do. I've seen that too. People want to keep connected in this community.
They do. So
Yeah. So you were able to run. You finally got elected.
I did.
And it's been since 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So what have been the big things that have happened that you've been involved in?
Probably COVID.
Yeah, so that's been the big thing for school boards across the country, not just ours, but
Yes.
specifically, what are the things that came about because of COVID?
Well, Dr. Rohr and I got interviewed with NPR, and we were on national radio, which blew my mind because I'm just a mom in Centerville, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty neat. It was a really hard time. It was a really hard time because we'd have packed rooms and it'd be like, there's my neighbor sitting there. Or, I taught your kid in religious education. These people that, I'm close to because we are a close-knit community. And I remember calling Dr. Henderson one day and said, well, can we have the meeting outside? And no one would have to wear a mask. And he said, we can't do that, Megan. I have a plan with the police. We have an evacuation plan. We have a safe room. And I'm thinking,
what's going to happen at this? Yeah.
I was so scared at that meeting. I was texting my priest in the bathroom getting sick. I was so nervous. And it was such a shame because we are such a tight community and something like that could tear us apart. The only time I think that we came close to something was was way before I was born when Stingley and the PTA had a falling out. And that's where that ox roast came from. Was that he designed the ox roast to bring the community back together. I don't know if you're familiar with the ox roast.
I'm not because I didn't grow up around here, but why don't you talk about that?
I vaguely remember, I think because it turned into the Americana Festival is what happened. But it was, I know it was behind Magzic and it was just this big roast and they had like a carnival. I would describe it more as
to create community connection.
Yeah, to bring everyone back together. Mm-hmm. The only thing I can think of that compare it to would be the ice cream social.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's a great time.
Something that's not political, or I guess it is to benefit the fire.
Yeah. And the ice cream social, it's been around forever. Since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. It was a highlight of the childhood, one of them, right. Because they would bring in the car wreck, and then they'd bring in the Jaws of Life, and then the helicopter, because it was on Mapleton. Or Maple.
Mm-hmm.
And the helicopter would land on the street. And as kids, we thought that was the coolest thing because your hair would be going crazy in the wind. And Mr. Winston, who was the farmer behind my dad's house, he would run the grill. And so you'd see your neighbors there. And
is this the ox roast or at the...
No, I'm sorry. No, this is the ice cream social. But that's the only thing I could pair the ox roast to because the Americana Festival, as you know, has grown into such a huge event that people from all over the state come to that. Mm-hmm. And I think the ice cream social would be the closest thing because that's really like our community thing that our community does. So I would describe that as the ox roast. I know in your guys' blue book, a sense of place.
Sense of community.
Sense of community.
Is what you're talking about.
It talks about the ox roast in there.
Yeah, and I've read it, but you can't possibly kind of get the visual of it with just a couple of pictures. So, all right. So I don't want to spend too much time on the COVID, but it was a challenging time. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of conflict, wearing masks, being in person. Those were all the conflicts. And then how did you all problem solve that to make it function?
I think we listened. Well, and I know we listened to the experts. We saw, what the Pediatric Association was saying. We looked at the studies, and the bottom line, we just want to keep the kids safe. That was our number one goal, was to keep the kids safe. And so there was a lot of meetings, a lot of talking about how we were going to do that. When was it safe to let the kids go back and not be remote? I think we did a good job for people who didn't know what they were doing because, a pandemic happens, once
100 years. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, is that all you can do is your best guess with the information you have, because none of us had all the information.
Nobody did.
Yeah, so I'm glad we're through that now. What have been the things that, as a board, you've been working on since we have a more of a normal situation?
Well, we're trying to pass the levy.
Yes, a very important one.
Yes, yes, we're trying to get the levy passed. Just typical day-to-day stuff. We're in negotiations right now. It's going back to what it was before COVID. Like it's the normal board stuff. I'm working with Tom Young and my Board of Ed reps. We have 5 student board representatives to the board. They don't vote, but they are our liaisons for us, the student population. And they've been working all year with Representative Tom Young to get a bill passed that would allow club sports to count as gym credit. Because as you may or may not know, if a kid does like Centerville High School track, Centerville High School, any sport at Centerville High School, they get it as gym credit now. Band, I think, color guard. And so they're working on getting club sports because a lot of kids spend a lot of time in the gym. Like my 7th grader, I think I told you he's a gymnast. He's in the gym 12 hours a week. And by the time he gets to high school, it's going to go up to 20 hours a week. So
that kind of thing doesn't give them gym credit, even though they are athletes.
Yes. So hopefully they can get this bill passed. But I'm really proud of my Board of Ed kids for working on that. And I'm the board advisor for the students.
Oh, is that what Legislative Liaison means?
No, that's a different role of mine.
That's a different role.
Yeah.
Tell us about that role.
So I communicate with our representatives and our senators for the state, and I also am the Ohio School Board Association Federal Legislative Liaison. They call it FLAG. I was appointed to that position in January, and so in September, I will be going to Washington to advocate for our district and the surrounding districts in District 10 with state or federal senators and stuff. So super nervous, but super, super exciting.
And those go together, nerves and exciting.
Yes, they do.
It's okay, yeah.
Yeah, when I was appointed to that, I said, "Oh, is that because I'm the Centerville Legislative Liaison?" And the woman at OSBA said, "No, we hear your name up in Columbus." And I think it's me advocating so much for the special needs community. I am working with, once again, Representative Tom Young on getting alternate assessment change. The state wants a certain percentage of the students in our district to be on an alternate assessment. And we have more students that are special needs than that percentage. And so they're having kids who are failing the alternate assessment try to take a typical assessment. And so Tom Young and I are working hard to try to get that change with the Ohio Department of Education. So
we're fortunate to have you there to be that, because you have so much experience with that. Okay, so let's talk about that. That's a great segue to advocating for families with special needs. So that's one way that you're advocating. What are some other ways that because you talk about all the mentors that you had, how are you mentoring other people now and becoming that?
I think just being very involved. I used to get phone calls and people say, "I don't know why, but so-and-so told me to call you." And I'd be like, "Okay, well, tell me what's going on." And they're like, "Well, my child's special needs." I'm like, "Okay, I know why you called me." So just having the special needs community, knowing they have someone on the school board who represents them. And like I said, I coach special needs basketball. I coach special needs track. I do soccer. Like I coach year round. So I'm also a coach to these kids. A lot of these kids don't call me Mrs. Sparks. They call me Coach Megan. And so I think just being out there and involved. I coach the special needs destination imagination team with my husband, and I'm going to put a merciful plug in here.
Yeah.
We were the first school district ever to have a special needs DI team. That came out of when we found out Zach was special needs. John's my husband. John and I had already been coaching DI since 6 months after we had gotten married. We called Jeff Schroyer to invite him to our wedding, and he's like, "You got to coach." So when we found out that Zach was special needs, I was heartbroken, and I remember crying, thinking he'll never do DI. This was such a big part of my childhood, and he's never going to do it. And then I got this idea, well, why can't they do a special needs version? And I went to Jeff Schroyer, who was my DI coach back in middle school and high school. So long connection with Jeff Schroyer. Pitched him my idea, and he's like, I love it. So I went to Terry Scalark, who was the head of DI Region 12, and she was a gifted teacher in Miamisburg, and pitched her my idea, and she's like, I think it's great. So we kind of kept it hush-hush the first year just to kind of see how it went, and it went great. And so last year, Michelle Oxrider, who was our district coordinator, myself and her husband and John were invited to do a Zoom presentation globally on what we were doing here. And now New Hampshire is starting a special needs DI program. And then this past weekend, we were at DI State and we were invited to come. And afterwards, this woman came up to me and said, Megan, I don't know if you remember me. And I go, I'm so sorry, I don't. She goes, I am so-and-so from headquarters, and I would like to invite your team to globals. And I'm
goodness.
like, what? Because me and my parents, we kid all the time, like, we're a global bound team because we knew we weren't going to globals because we don't compete. You know, we get like the Spirit of DI award and stuff, but we don't compete. And so I think next year we will be the first DI team ever to be a special needs team to compete at globals. So that's really exciting. And a shout out for Centerville for, you know, thinking ahead and being innovative to be like, okay, let's try this. Let's see how it's going to go. Because no one global, as you may or may not know, DI
No, I know.
DI is a global
Mhm.
a global thing, and we're the first one in the world to do it here.
That is so I got chills. I'm getting a little emotional too because I love that. I do not know how you do all you do. I also have 5 kids, and we went to global several times. So I do know, and I was a coach as well. So I know the DI language. But I'm so thrilled that you have that opportunity to coach special needs kids in that.
Yeah.
So what have been some of the challenges in trying to innovate like this?
You mean with the special
With
needs?
DI, yeah.
Having my son stay focused.
Yeah.
He because I'm mom, he's comfortable with me, and sometimes I have to bring him back. There's a little boy who's been
That's with typical people too.
Yeah. There's a little boy who's on my team who I think he thinks we're dating. Even though he knows my husband, he's always trying to kiss me. And I'm always like, you know, Coach John's my husband, right? So
the boundaries are a little bit
there
different.
are no
with
boundaries.
special. Yeah.
Yeah. And just finding what interests them. And the first meeting, we talk to the parents. Every year we have like a truck or something in because my son's so into trucks. And we talk about what the kids are into, and then we develop. This year we did service learning. We went down to Matthews 25 Ministries. If you ever get a chance to volunteer there, it's an amazing opportunity. But they really welcome special needs individuals to volunteer. They have a sensory room. So if you get overwhelmed, you can go in there. But that was their service project because they do service projects almost every year. And so they had it DI Man, modeled after Batman. And he was going for their skit to different countries who had natural disasters, handing off the goodie bags. And we had Batman music and facts on the backdrop. And it was really neat. But they were able to paint. So just finding stuff that they can do. A fun story is my son, because of DI, thinks he can run power drills, power tools, just in the Sawzall, anything. Because my husband and the other dads would do hand over hand to, you know, help them cut their wood and whatnot. So
they don't get hurt.
Yes.
Yeah.
So his first year of theater this year, he took that class. And I said, no, watch him because he's going to run to the power tools. He thinks he's an expert. And sure enough, bam, he ran to the drill. And he does know how to use a drill, giving him credit. The saw makes me a little more nervous, but those are the type of skills that they're getting from DI.
Mm-hmm.
I have a picture of him in the backyard with just a plank of wood and all these screws, and him just screwing the screws in the plank of wood just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was one of the great things about DI is just giving those kids the opportunity to learn stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he loves set build. He likes going to set build and painting and making stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that all comes from DI.
Yeah,
I hope I answered your question.
No, you totally did. For those that are listening that might not know about DI, it's creative problem solving, and we've talked about that in a previous episode as well. But I didn't know about this new angle on it. Can you also talk a little bit about Special Olympics? You mentioned a little bit about that earlier, and how how that has impacted your life and how you've been involved that way. Because that's been a long time. That's been
18 seasons.
18 seasons.
It's funny because Linda Connell, who has since passed, God rest her soul, I love her. She was one of my mentors. She's the one I got a hold of when I called the Special Olympics office. And she's like, well, there's basketball at the Centerville Rec Center. Do you live close to Centerville? I'm like, I live in Centerville. Perfect. So I went there, and after that season was done, she's like, okay, this is Art Komorowski. He's the track coach. And I said, okay, I'm doing track. And at the end of that, they're like, okay, this is Doug Sink. He's the baseball coach. I did that. Okay, well, this is so-and-so. He's the soccer coach. And it just year-round coaching. It's funny because I think Art didn't think I was going to stick around because he was used to, because I was 26 years old, right out of college. And I'm going to volunteer for you. And I think he thought I was going to eventually not show up anymore.
Yeah.
And 18 seasons later, he's given me the whistle.
And you've learned a lot, I'm sure.
I have.
What are some of the takeaways for you? What have you learned?
Just how to advocate for your child correctly. The chain of command, who to talk to. Now that Zach's getting older, like Jane Weichel, she's helping me with the waivers. Like, this is how you get in a waiver, and this is the county, and this is what the county, because, he's only going to be with Centerville until he's 22. And so what's the next step after that? I like to say he's going to go to seminary school.
Keep him safe.
Yeah.
So for people that aren't aware, why is it 22 with special needs?
State law requires the school district to take students from age 3 to 22. So Centerville preschool, it's a state mandated
for special needs.
Mm-hmm. And then after they graduate, I'm going to say air quote, graduate, they walk with their class. They don't actually receive their diploma, but they go into the ITOPS program, which is currently, I believe, at Bethany Lutheran Village is where it's at. And so after they are a senior in high school for the next 3 years, they're at Bethany working on skills to get a job and be out in the community. So a lot of people don't know about the ITOPS program. But I heard Sinclair now has a program for special needs students too. So I think a lot of kids are going from ITOPS to, I think it's called Top Spartan. It's very confusing because the names are very similar.
Yeah.
And they're going to go there. But I mean, what an exciting time to be alive where these kids can go to college and get that experience.
Yeah.
So
I love that we're finding ways to, make life better, more exciting and more hopeful.
Well, it's sad because if you think, 50, 60 years ago, these kids would be in institutions. Mm-hmm. And they're just make our society, our community so much richer. Mm-hmm. My daughter, who my kids, we call a little tribe. We go everywhere together. She's helping me in track this year. She's like a peer model. She's 8. And there's a little boy. She's a 2nd grader. And there's this little 3rd grade boy who has Down syndrome. And she's like, what school do you go to? And they said their school. And she goes, I go to that school. So she's like, Mom, I'm going to help him. I'm like, okay. She came home the next day and she said, Mom, I saw so-and-so at school and we played all day on well, not all day, but all recess on the playground. And that's neat. And then my kids went to Forest Field Park one time and there was a young man with Down syndrome and my kids played with him. And afterwards, the mom was in tears saying, we've come here all the time and no one's ever played with him before. So just getting them out in the community
mm-hmm. and comfortable with people that are different
yeah.
or not typical. That's really important. So thank you for advocating and for, sharing these resources on this podcast. And I hope that it really is something that people will recognize that Centerville does well and is continuing to do well.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I loved the conversation, and I feel like, there's one last thing I want to talk about is Roy from the Lamp Shop.
Oh,
Can you share that
please.
story as we wrap up?
Here in Centerville, there's so many people who don't have their names on street signs, mm-hmm. who, they don't have a book written about them, but they've really made an impact. And one of those people is Roy to me. And like I said, I worked at McDonald's in high school and in college, and I called them the Breakfast Club. And it was a group of these senior citizens who would come in every day and get their quarter coffee, a newspaper, and maybe, I think it was like a biscuit sausage. And they'd sit in the corner and they would talk. And there was a one man named Roy. And every time you would say, hey, Roy, how you doing? He'd say, it's the best damn day of my life. No matter where you saw him. And I'd see Roy and, every Sunday morning at 7:30 at Incarnation. And I believe he owned the lamp shop uptown. But if you knew about Roy, he dropped out of high school to serve in the war. I believe his son died in Vietnam, and he lost his wife. And he had a very sad life looking from the outside in. But despite that, his attitude, you would never know because he was always happy. He wore these denim overalls. And, I think it was a World War II hat, one of those black hats. And I can see him so vividly in my memories. But when I'm having a bad day, sometimes I hear Roy in my head. It's the best damn day of my life. And I don't think he ever knew what kind of impact he made on that high school kid working behind the McDonald's counter. So if you ever get a chance to do a small segment on Roy, I would love that. He was wonderful. I think he was 80. I'd have to ask Mr. Carroll. Mr. Carroll remembers. I think he was 80 when he finally got his high school diploma.
It's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a good reminder for us. We all can have the best day of our life. I'm not going to cuss. All right. Thank you so much for being here today.
That was a direct quote from Roy.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you to MVCC for helping to produce this podcast and to my guest, Megan Sparks, for being here today. If you have an interesting story about Centerville-Washington Township, please contact Centerville-Washington History. Please also come visit our museums in Uptown Centerville, Tuesday through Friday, 12 o'clock to 4 p.m. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram and visit our website, CentervilleWashingtonHistory.org. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.